And welcome to the fourth video lesson on Living World, and this is all about the distribution of global ecosystems, which are known as biomes. So one of the two things I really want you to learn from this is some keywords, okay, and you've got 9 keywords here, which I'm going to go through in a minute. It's really important that you remember these, so at the end of the presentation, go back and just check that you've really understood what these keywords mean, particularly those on the top 2 rows. Okay, so geography is often centered around this idea of distribution. And all we mean here is how something is spread out around the world when we're talking about global distribution. So we've got 3 maps here. You'll notice that they're not evenly distributed. The top map there is people, how, how densely populated other areas are. You notice there's lots of people in Asia, for example, and in Europe. The bottom left is birth rates. So you'll notice in Central Africa their birth rate's very high. And then the bottom right is rainfall. And you notice that there's lots and lots of rain at the equator, for example. So they're all concentrated in certain areas. And this is what we mean by distribution. We've actually tried to describe where those concentrations are. So one of the most important ways to do that is to understand this thing called latitude. You'll have come across this before. And quite simply, it is where something is in relation to the equator, either north or south. This is going to be very, very important for ecosystems because basically the energy from the sun is more concentrated at the equator. It feels stronger. If you notice on this map here, that as you go away from the equator, further up towards the North Pole, you're still getting the same amount of incoming energy, but it's spread over a larger area, so it feels weaker. So this links to another of the key terms, which is called insolation, which is actually a word to describe the energy coming in from the sun. Okay, so again, this diagram reinforces what I've just said, that the energy coming that reaches the higher latitudes towards the North Pole is more spread out. Okay, so it has a weaker effect. Just as if you dilute your orange squash, it is weaker. Okay, because it's more spread out within the drink. Whereas if you drank it neat, it would be more concentrated. Now, another word which sounds a bit like latitude but mustn't get it confused, it's very different, is altitude. Now, altitude is how far above sea level a place is. Okay, and this is actually a diagram based around Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. It's a very basic diagram. Okay, it's a very tall mountain. But basically, the higher up you go, the colder it's going to be, and the windier it's going to be. Okay, so temperatures fall and winds increase the higher up a place is. So clearly, where you get mountains, that's going to affect what can grow. And ocean currents, now it's easy to think of the sea as just still water that just comes in and out with the tides. But actually, the oceans aren't ponds, they're not still at all. In fact, they're constantly moving. In some parts of the world, that means that warm water arrives from other places. In other parts of the world, it's cold water. Now, in the UK, for example, we're very much affected by something called the Gulf Stream, which brings lots of warm water, which starts from the Caribbean and comes up towards the UK, which brings us lots of warm, wet weather. Okay. If you look on the map at a place called Peru in South America, you'll notice that's got cold water going past it. And that's one of the reasons that Peru is actually so dry, because where you get cold water, you get drier weather. So just to repeat, warm water brings wetter and warmer weather. Cold water brings drier and cooler weather. Now, so what is this thing called a biome? Well, a biome is an ecosystem. It's just one at a global scale. Just remember, ecosystems can be any scale at all. So we can talk about the ecosystem of a tree, a pond, something like Thetford Forest, but we can also talk about the ecosystem on a much bigger scale. Okay, and we call those biomes. So here's an example here: tundra, rainforest, grassland, deserts, temperate deciduous forest. They are linked to climate. So not surprisingly, when we talk about a desert ecosystem, we're talking about a hot, dry climate. When we're talking about rainforest, we're talking about a hot, wet climate. Relief. Oh, relief. Not that sort of relief, no. It's about the shape of the land. Okay, so hopefully these two pictures will help. Is it mountainous, as in the top picture, or is it flat, as in the bottom picture of the fens, or is it somewhere in between? Okay, so if we think about Norfolk, we haven't got any mountains at all. We haven't really got any hills. But most of Norfolk isn't completely flat, so it's not as extreme as the one at the bottom. Okay, so it is somewhere in between, but it's very much towards the flatter end. Okay, whereas if you look at that top picture there, obviously it's very, very mountainous, and again, that's going to affect what can grow and the type of plants and animals that we get. One of the ways that relief affects climate and ecosystems is the effect it has on patterns of rainfall, okay, and wind, because basically mountains act as a great big barrier to both. And this leads to something called the rain shadow, which is another of our key terms. So one of the effects is called the rain shadow. Note how the rain falls only on the left-hand side of these mountains. Okay, so you've got the ocean there on the far left. Air is blowing off the sea, and what that is doing is it's bringing rainfall to the left-hand side where the mountains are. And all the rain's basically falling on the left-hand side because the air's being pushed up, and of course that air is really moist because it's just come out off the sea. Now, once it gets to the top of the mountains and starts going down the other side, the air's going down. The air going down is always going to be dry. Okay, try to remember that. Also, um, it's going to get warmer as it goes down. Okay, so it's not unusual, and certainly you see this in the United States, to see desert-like conditions on one side of the mountain, and then on the other side of the mountains, it's very different. It's much wetter. It's much more, you have a lot more growing on the left compared to the right. So this is called the rain shadow, simply, and it shows the impact that the mountains can have. Um, Now, in deserts, you often find drought-resistant plants, and this is just simply a term to mean those plants that can cope without rainfall for long periods of time. Okay, so it's an example here. Now, let's move on to explaining the map of global ecosystems. So I've done a scan of the map here. Hopefully it's nice and clear. And there's quite a lot going on here. And the first thing I'd like you to look at is the key at the bottom. You'll notice it's got all the different, and you'll be fed up of us saying this at the end of the course. The key is the key. Whenever you have a geographical source, always head to the key first of all. What's it about? And basically, it's showing these different biomes, these global ecosystems, and it's shading in the map to show where we find them in the world. And one useful thing is some lines of latitude that are put on for you. So you notice the equator is shown, the Tropic of Capricorn is shown, there's also the Tropic of Cancer. A lot of these maps also show what's called the Arctic Circle or the Antarctic Circle. So keep an eye on those because they can be quite useful when you're describing where the different ecosystems are. Now, the one I'm going to concentrate on to begin with is tropical rainforest. So I've drawn a box there to show where most of the tropical rainforests are. Okay, and you'll notice that the line that goes through the middle of that box is the equator. So one thing we can say about the tropical rainforest is they are mostly found near to the equator. Okay, so you see what I've done there? I've used the line of latitude to identify where. Otherwise, if you just said in the middle, you're not going to get any marks. Okay, you need to be using geographical words. However, there are also exceptions. So with the red arrows there, they're pointing to parts of the areas sort of close to the equator that don't have tropical rainforest, and they don't even have savanna grassland either. So if you look on the one on the left-hand side there, that's actually what's called the alpine. And if you know your general geography, you might know that that's actually the Andes Mountains. So not surprisingly, you're not going to get tropical rainforest in the mountains because it's too high up, and it's too cold for the rainforest to get that far. And then you also notice that you've got an area of desert there, which is on the Horn of Africa. So there are exceptions to the idea that the equator is mostly tropical rainforest or savanna. When describing any distribution, always use your compass points. Okay, so you've got north, east, south, and west there. Okay, and by doing that, you can see that there is more um, rainforest just about north of the equator than there is south of the equator. Um, and certainly, what you could say is if you look at the tropics, there's very, very little tropical rainforest that is south of the Tropic of Capricorn. Okay, do you understand what I'm doing there? I'm just using those compass points to describe that distribution. Okay, right, now the other part of this is looking at the climate graphs. Simply, you've got to learn this one really. The rainfall equals the bars, and that the scale for that is on the right hand side, and the temperature equals the red line, and the scale is on the left hand side. And one way I always try to remember that, imagine trying to fill up the bars with water. So the bars are almost always blue. So blue, water, rainfall. And then think of the red line, temperatures, hot temperatures. So they're red. Hopefully that will help. Okay. If you look at the two scales, you've got one on the left, one on the right. Degrees C is on the left hand side, it's actually temperatures. And then the rainfall, the millimeters, that's going to be your rainfall. So to work out the annual rainfall, estimate the monthly average, which I've done there by putting a green line across, multiply that by 12. So if you look at Fairbanks, for example, the monthly average is about 20 millimetres, multiply that by 12 and you've got 240 millimetres a year. Right, just to finish off, at the start of this presentation, there were 9 pictures of biomes. They're in order. Can you guess what they are? Okay, I'm just going to pause for a little bit, give you a chance to have a look, and then we'll put the last slide up with the answers. Okay, so here's the answers. How many did you get? We've got the polar, tundra, coniferous forest, deciduous forest, tropical rainforest, savanna, desert, Mediterranean. And there's a tricky one. Did you get the alpine? Because that is probably the hardest one of the lot. Okay, well done if you managed to get most of those or even some of them. Fascinating topic. I hope you agree, and I hope this will help you with getting the work done on this lesson. Okay, speak soon.